Hey guys, so today we're going to be doing an LS400 98 to 2000s. That's a 1UZ FE VVT-i. This is going into an IS200 plug and play, and it's using a manual gearbox. So let's do this. Right, as I said, this is going to be an LS400 1UZ VVT-i, so it's a 98 to 2000 model one. It's going into an IS200, it's going to be plug and play, and the guy's using a manual gearbox. So what we're going to do today, we're going to go through the layout of the entire harness, showing the customer where everything plugs in, and then we're going to do the testing portion, which is made up of a section with just the ignition coming on and testing a couple of things, and then actually get the engine running. But before we do that, let's take a look at what goes into building one of these harnesses. See you in a second. Right, so as you can see, we take the whole harness, we strip everything apart, we clean it, we remove everything that's no longer necessary, we add in what is necessary, and we make the adaptation down here at the ECU end to make it plug and play into an IS200. So, as I said, three things we're going to do, but let's get started with the layout, and we're going to start right here at the ECU box. Okay, so first of all, the 1UZ ECU just slots straight into the IS200 ECU case. No problems there at all, no modifications required. Okay, your ECU has 6 plugs. There's 5 white plugs here and a gray plug at the end over there. Now guys, please make sure that you have the gray plug facing towards the front of the vehicle. If you wait till the end of the video, you'll see we put a couple of photos of what it looks like complete, and we actually put this in an ECU box on the bench and show you exactly how everything should look when it's in your vehicle. Regarding the ECU plugs, they are all completely unique, okay? So you cannot get the wrong plug in the wrong place, okay? So don't worry about that at all, all right? So that's the ECU side, nice and simple. Just for 6 plugs, plug them straight in, job done. Then we have the interface with the IS200 ECU body plugs, okay? So these are the 2 plugs that get left behind when you remove your 1G engine and engine harness, okay? So these are gonna plug directly into here, and this is how we interface between the 1UZ and the IS200, okay? Next up, we have our body plugs, okay? So these are the ones that supply all the powers and stuff from the vehicle and some signals, but they are your gray plug over there, your blue plug over there, and your black plug over there. Again, these are all 3 unique plugs, so there's no way you can get it in the wrong place, so you do not have to worry about doing that at all, all right? After that, we have our ATEMU device. So this is the one that's emulating the automatic transmission. Remember, this is a manual. So we've got this device to emulate the transmission so the ECU stays happy. She doesn't throw any check engine lights, and she runs exactly as she should. Okay. And then lastly, we have our MPX converter. Now, the 1UZ VVT-i does use MPX to communicate in its original car. So does the IS200. Unfortunately, with Toyota, they had some changes between different models. So you can't just plug this into this vehicle and everything is going to work. So we use our little device here, and what that basically does is it takes the MPX data from the 1UZ, translates it to work with the IS200, so all your gauges and everything work correctly. One thing it also does as well is it converts the tacho signal. So in other words, the 4-cylinder signal that's coming out of the engine ECU gets converted to a 6-cylinder signal for the IS200. So your RPM and everything works correctly. Okay, so that is the inside of the ECU box. It's really, really simple. 6 ECU plugs, 3 body plugs there, 2 IS200 plugs, and then these just get tucked down the side over there. Really straightforward. Then we move on to our grommet, and the grommet does actually slide right in over there. Once that's on, lid goes on, completely watertight, because remember, none of the stuff is waterproof. Okay, so the lid is what keeps it waterproof, along with this rubber grommet that slides in over there. Right. Once that's done, we move along to here, and you check the harness just comes along here till we reach the back of the engine over here. Okay, so this is a piece of plastic that runs across the back of the engine. It just houses the harness and keeps everything nice and neat. Now, there is 3 mounting points on this one, which is right over here, right over there. Hopefully you can see that with my fingers pointing, and right over there. So you can see this is actually a 3UZ engine, hence the reason why these 2 mounting points don't line up. So a little tip for you guys, if you are wanting to put a 1UZ harness on a 3UZ engine, can be done. Obviously you can just use the 1 bolt if you really want to. But if you get a water bridge from a 1UZ VVT-i, all of these mounting points will be there and correct. Okay. Right, so that's the piece there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make our way down the front of the engine, and we'll come back and then we'll go around that side over there. So first of all, harness pops out there, goes over the fuel pulsation damper, not regulator, moves on to the next piece of plastic that keeps everything together. Nice and simple, 2 places where it mounts to. There's your bolt and there's your bolt. Now these are identical between the 3UZ and the 1UZ in terms of these mounting positions. So as you can see, everything is bolted up as it should be here. Out the side here, we have 3 breakout sections over here. And right at the back here, we have injector 7 and coil 7. So just a quick note, when you are looking at the cylinder numbers, you're looking from the back of the engine or the driver's perspective. This is the left-hand side, so this has cylinders 1, 3, 5, and 7. That's the right-hand side, and that has cylinders 2, 4, 6, and 8. It can also commonly be referred to as bank 1 because it's got cylinder 1, and bank 2 because it's got cylinder 2. Okay, so that's another way that they can be referred to. All right. So, as I said, first section that pops out there goes to these 2 coils. Now, if you've seen a standard 1UZ VVT-i harness, you probably noticed that we made a little change here. And that is that this coil used to come out here and just have a length that made it all the way over to there. Now, in your 3UZ harnesses, as standard, this is the configuration that it comes out. And we changed it to that way because it makes it easier for you guys to remember which plug goes where. So in other words, that one, these 2. That one, these 2, that one, these 2. Okay, so it makes it super nice and easy. All right. So coming out the middle here, you're just going to have injector 5 and coil 5. Super simple. And the one at the front here, you're going to have injector 3, coil 3, but you're also going to have the inlet cam for the left bank sensor. Okay, so this is a sensor for the camshaft. Now this is in relation to the VVT. It's actually sensing the degrees of the camshaft, and obviously it's using that to confirm that it's what it's asking for is what it's getting. Okay, so there's actually 3 cam sensors on a 1UZ VVT-i and a 3UZ VVT-i. All right, so that's that section over there. When that comes to an end, it just comes straight along here, down to here, and then we have another breakout over here. Oh, sorry, there's another one halfway down here. This is your noise filter. So it's a little gray thing that gets bolted to your inlet manifold. That plugs directly into that. So basically, it's just a capacitor. It's designed to absorb electrical noise that's generated by things like the injectors and coils. Okay, so coming down to here at the next breakout point there, we're going to have injector 1 and coil 1. We are also going to have the oil control valve for the left bank. So this is actually what does the VVT-i. So this is how the camshaft timing is actually changed via oil controlled solenoid. All right. Also coming out here, we have our TPS connector. Now it doesn't look like a normal Toyota TPS connector, and that's true, but basically what they've done is they've built a little sub harness, and there's your TPS down inside there. So you actually see the sort of generic Toyota TPS connector down in there. Obviously, as you can imagine, it would be almost impossible to get that off if you were trying to remove the engine harness. So what they did is they made a little sub harness that this plugs into, and that goes down to the TPS sensor. Very good idea. Also coming out of here is going to be our accelerator position sensor. So that runs across the front over there and plugs in over there. So yes, this is a drive-by-wire, even though you do have an accelerator cable. You can see where the cable goes inside over there, but it is a drive-by-wire system. So here's your motor that's actually moving your throttle position, throttle blade. The cable does actually give you the ability to have a slight amount of throttle opening if the throttle motor was to shut down. Okay, so is drive-by-wire. Yes, there is an accelerator cable, but it is not controlling the throttle blade at all. Okay, right, so that's all that pops out over there, and then the harness goes down underneath here, and we have another pop-out section over here, and that's going to go to the cam sensor for the front. So this is one, has a single tooth on the cam pulley here, and that what tells the ECU what the engine position actually is, because this is a static pulley. This doesn't change like the VVT-i does, so that is determining what position the cam is actually in based on control inputs from the ECU. So the ECU is telling the oil control solenoid to retard or advance the cam, and that's then determining if that is being done correctly. Okay. This one over here is purely for engine position. So it's using it to determine when to fire the spark plugs and inject the fuel. Okay. So again, only a single tooth on there, nothing fancy. These are obviously a 3-tooth, and each tooth has a different duration if you look at it under an oscilloscope. Right, also coming out there is going to be your drive-by-wire motor plug. So this does have 4 wires. Obviously the motor only requires 2 to work. The other 2 are actually for a clutch. So you may also hear these as referred to as a Toyota clutched drive-by-wire system. And that is exactly what it sounds like. There's basically a clutch in here that needs to be activated. If you don't activate that clutch, then the engagement between the motor and the throttle blade is completely shut off. So effectively, if they want to have a safety feature of shutting the throttle down, they literally cut the power to the clutch. That then disengages the motor from the throttle blade and you shut down your throttle system altogether. So there's no ways that this could accelerate on its own randomly. Okay, right, so that's that section over there. Then moving on down over here, and you'll see that we have 2 mounting points here and here for the harness to keep out of the way of the belt. Okay, and coming down to over here, we then have a breakout to 3 different sections over here. Okay, so the one section that's taped up, which is part of the original harness, makes its way down through there. You can actually see the wire over there and comes all the way down to here, and that is your crank sensor. So that's nice and simple. You'll see this is where we've added in new wiring because this doesn't come standard on the 1UZ VVT-i harness. And the really thin wire that you see there, which comes through over here, that is for your oil pressure switch. Now, obviously, because this is an LS400 engine, this is actually facing the front. On a 1UZ VVT-i, your oil filter housing is back here, and more importantly, your switch is actually pointing backwards in that direction. Hence the reason why this breaks up at the top here, so that can come through the hole there, go around the back of the AC pump, and then plug into the oil pressure switch there. And lastly, this is your AC compressor plug. Okay, so again, we do make the AC work as it should do with these particular setups, and you'll see we go through testing of that when we do the ignition on testing. Right, so this is the front and side section of the harness. So let's go back and look at that back section over there. Okay, so following the plastic along there, we have the section that pops out here. Now this is where the originally automatic gearbox harness came out, but let's go over and see what's coming out at the moment. So first section that pops out is going to be the earth strap. Okay, now you'll see here there is actually an M6 hole there. That's for the 3UZs. We use the M8 bolt over here. This is for the 1UZ VVT-Is. Okay, so this is the one you're going to use here, not the other one there. But because your engine's a 1UZ VVT-I, you should only have that bolt in there anyway. There should be nothing in there. It should be just a hole that's threaded. Okay, also coming out here is then going to be our Lambda sensor. So hopefully you can see it. I might just pull it out a little bit there. Got it tucked away there. So there you go. You can see the Lambda sensor plug over there. So this is for this side on the left bank. Now, bearing in mind, guys, there is a metal shield that goes between the exhaust and the block. That connector is designed to go behind that shield. And I do implore you, please put that shield back and put the plug behind there, because if that plug touches the exhaust and it melts, you've got a power and a ground in there. You're going to end up then shorting the fuse and it's going to blow, and that means you're going to lose power to your mass airflow sensor. You're going to lose power to the ACIS system. You're going to lose power to both of your oxygen sensors as well, and usually even power to the ECU because they're all in the same circuit. Okay, so you're going to have no end of problems with that. So please, 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 please put that metal shield back so that that connector cannot touch the exhaust and melt. Okay, right, so that's that section over there. Then also coming out the back here, you'll see this is the new stuff we've added in, and this is your gearbox harness. Okay, in this case the customer's running a J160 gearbox, so you can see if I just scoot around here that we have the usual J160 or 154 reverse switch, and we have the normal speed sensor over there. Okay, so that is completely detachable, and the reason we've done that is obviously you guys sometimes change your mind, you want to change gearbox. Well, guess what, that's no problem. You just call us up and you tell us what gearbox you want to move to, and we'll make you just a new small sub harness section. Unplug your old one, plug in your new one, easy peasy like that. Okay, moving down to here, because you can obviously see this dangling over there. This is now your starter knock harness, so it's the one that goes underneath the inlet manifold, and that obviously goes to the starter motor and the knock sensors. So that's this black plug you see here, which goes down through there, and also has the main starter cable, which in this case we've actually cut and shortened and crimped a new terminal on for the customer. And this obviously is what you need to put on with the inlet manifold off. Okay, right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you what it looks like underneath there. So let's take a look, and you'll see the overall picture here. So you can see it goes down into the starter motor, into knock 1 and knock 2. Okay, so there you go, starter motor, knock 1 and knock 2. Okay, now in this case we did actually rebuild the entire harness, because what we received from the customer was pretty much had all the connectors gone off of it, and it was in very, very bad shape. So we have actually rebuilt that all brand new for him. And so therefore you can see everything is nicely labeled on there. You'll notice that everything we build new gets all labeled when it goes into the harness. All right, so that covers that section over there. Let's pop over to the other side and carry on over there. Right, so again, we're still dealing with the plastic section here, and down here you'll see another pop out, and that goes to the second earth terminal, ring terminal. And again, it goes into the M8 bolt over there, not the M61. If you have a 1-user VVT-i, there'll be nothing in here. You shouldn't have a bolt in there at all. This is the one that you're going to be using to bolt the earth strap to. Okay, moving along to the front over there. The section that breaks out over here is going to be in Injector 8 and Coil 8. Nice and simple. Moving along, it's going to break out over here, and we're going to have one going to the ACIS solenoid connector. That's this one that runs underneath the harness there. We're also going to have Injector 6 and Coil 6. Okay. Moving along here, we're then going to have the cam sensor for the right bank. Okay. We've got Injector 4 and Coil 4 over there. Now you can see here there is mounting points there, and I normally put the P-clamp on here just to show you guys that you can just use a P-clamp there, and that'll hold the harness in place on this side over here, because you don't have a piece of plastic like you do on the other side. All right, moving along to the front over here, and then we're going to have Injector 2, Coil 2, the 2-wire coolant temp sensor. Don't worry about this. You guys are just going to have a blanking bolt in there. You don't need to do anything in that particular case. Remember that we're getting the coolant temperature data from the ECU via MPX. Okay. Also coming out here, we have the oil control valve for the right bank. Also coming out here, we then have our mass airflow sensor connector. Okay, so very important, make sure you have the correct mass airflow sensor for your engine. These 1-user VVT-is from the LS400s and the Celsius use what I call the bullet style one, because if you look from the side, it kind of looks like a bullet there. Anyway, that's for those ones, but do be careful. Not every 1-user VVT-i uses this one. On the Crown Japanese models, the very later ones, they use the small mass airflow sensor that looks exactly like that. Okay, so always make sure, take your ECU part number, stick the number in Toyo DIY, find your vehicle, go into engine, go into airbox, and you'll see that there is a part number for the mass airflow sensor. Okay, make sure you get the correct mass airflow sensor for your ECU, because this wiring is different from that wiring. Okay, and if you mix them up, I think one way you mix them up, you end up blowing up the intake air temperature sensor, because you feed 12 volts directly down it and it shorts out and pops. Okay, so yeah, please make sure you get the correct mass airflow sensor. All right, then coming down here, and we have another breakout down here at the bottom, and one goes to the alternator plug. So again, this is one that's normally in a separate sub harness that goes underneath the engine. Okay, so we add this all in new. So there's your alternator plug over there, again all labeled for you guys. Here's also your low oil level sensor. So again, when you have a front sump, your low oil level sensor is right here in the sump. And then lastly, coming down along here, you then have your oxygen sensor for the right bank over there. Okay, so quick fact, the 1-user VVT-i has both the short wired sensors that go into the exhaust manifold, which is different from the 3UZ, so make sure you get the correct one. The left bank has the same sensor for the 1-user VVT-i and the 3UZ, because they're both short. The only difference is with the 1-user VVT-i, they use the same sensor on the left and the right bank, but on the 3UZ, they use a longer wire sensor here. So if you go look at one of my 3UZ videos, you'll see exactly what I mean. And the plug's not that long down there, it's more all the way over here, sort of the same length as the oil level on the alternator plugs over there. Okay, right, so other things that you need to add on. Remember, I've gone through this harness over here. This is what goes back to the customer. He does already have his main starter cable. That's already included, so that's going to go straight to the positive of the battery. The only thing is going to add in, which we do send back if you guys send us that harness underneath, which we do normally ask you to. Obviously, we've taken his alternator main charging cable out. We've given it a clean or whatever. We'll send that back with him. But yeah, this is the only other thing you've got to add on, which is this one over here. It bolts onto the alternator, nice and simple. And ideally what you're going to do is run it down, run it along the subframe at the back, and then you're going to pop up over here. And in your ECU box, remember this is a right-hand drive, you've got this little bolt over here where you're going to bolt the alternator main positive onto, okay? And again, as per usual, please use that one over there, because that's going to then save your alternator in the event that that cable ever got damaged. Bearing in mind you are running it underneath the engine, lots of places for it to get damaged. If there was any type of damage, which would then cause a short straight to earth, your 120 amp fuse would pop, and then you're completely safe. You don't have to worry about that being an issue at all. Okay, so don't connect it to the positive of the battery, just to here. Please don't forget, guys, on your fuse box, you have this thick wire over here that goes onto your positive terminal. This is the power supply that comes into the fuse box from the battery, and this powers your entire car. If you don't bolt that on, nothing's going to work. Okay, so always make sure you put that on there. If you only have one terminal on your battery terminal, which is sort of standard for these, this one can go on the bottom, the starter motor can go on top, and that's it. Alternator goes into there, and that's all your power sorted out there. Okay. Next up is the earths. Now on the earths, you have this one over here, which basically runs from here, underneath the battery, bolts to the chassis, and then runs down, and you can bolt it onto the block. Okay, so that's your main earth for your block, and that's obviously what's using your starter motor is using for an earth, etc. Okay, what you can also do is you can use one of these points over here. Now in your case, it's probably easy to use that one, because if you remember, your IS200 had a pipe that ran along there. And there was actually a bolt hole designed for an earth strap. It's one of the, it's not a wire, or sorry, there was a wire on that one, but it's a bolt there that you can bolt your original earth strap from the firewall to the cylinder head. Okay, so remember, these harnesses, all they're earthing through is those 2 points over there. Okay, all right, so that's an earth strap you can add as well. You've got your main one coming from your battery down to your block. And then lastly, there was an earth strap, and there was like one of those braided ones that went from one of the gearbox bolts onto the chassis leg. Just add that on. You can't go wrong with adding that on as well. Then you've got 3 earths to the engine. Absolutely fine too. I just do love a good earth setup. All right. So hopefully that's nice and easy to get on. It's again just a U shape. You sort of just drop it on top of the engine and start bolting all the plastics down, and then start plugging everything in. So really not super complicated. Shouldn't take you guys too long at all, maybe 30-40 minutes in total to get everything down. Okay, right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get ready. We're going to come back, and then we're going to do the testing of the engine harness and the engine. So see you in a second. Right, guys, so now we're back, and we've been doing the testing of the engine. And as I said at the beginning, it's going to be made up of 2 sections, one with the ignition on and one with the engine running. So first thing I'm going to do, let's go through all the tests that we're going to do with a bit of explanation, and then we'll jump into the testing with the ignition on. So first thing we're going to be looking for is the immobilizer removal. So you can see at the moment here, the security light is flashing. We're going to insert the key. Obviously, there's no chips or anything in this key. There's no wiring. The immobilizer has actually physically been removed, but I still retain the security light, so people walk past the car, they'll see the security light flashing, they'll think you have an immobilizer on there. Might deter some people from trying to nick your car. Okay, next up is going to be the ambient temp, the check engine light, and the charge light. So at this stage, obviously, we've turned the ignition on, we've checked the immobilizer is not working. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to pop around to here. We're going to check our climate controls and make sure that we are seeing a reading on there. Now, because this is using a standard ECU, we are actually connecting the outside temperature sensor to the ECU, and it's actually sending that data via MPX to the vehicle. Okay, so what you see there is an accurate reading, and it will change depending on the temperature outside. Okay. Then we'll check the check engine light, the oil light, and the alternator light, so we make sure they all come on. And again, when we start the vehicle, we want to make sure they all go off. Okay, so that's perfect. Then we're going to test the reverse switch. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what your gearbox does, is I'm going to bridge these 2 terminals together. We should get the beep from the cluster like you do when you put the IS200 in reverse. Really straightforward. We're then going to test the speedo, because in this case he's using a J160, so we actually have a speed sensor plug. So I'm going to use my device that I always use. We're going to put a signal back through the plug there, and we should see the speedo go up and down as we do that. So that means I test not only the 12 volts and the ground, but also the signal directly from there to there. All right, quick tip for you guys: if you fit everything in and you see that you're getting no speed through at all, a nice easy test to determine whether the fault's either with the sensor, maybe one of the wires got crushed, or whether it's with the gearbox itself, is if you can jack up the car or on a lift, nice and easy, but basically pull the sensor out the gearbox, strap it to a drill, get your mate to sit in, turn the ignition on, and you spin the drill. If you don't get any signal through there, then there's a problem either with the sensor or the wiring. If you do get a speed signal coming through, then there's a problem with the way that the sensor is engaging with the gearbox. Okay, so that's just a nice, quick, easy test that you can do to determine where the problem actually lies. Okay. Next up is going to be OBD2 test. What I basically mean by that is I want to make sure that my OBD2 machine is actually communicating with the ECU. Because remember, these are plugged directly into the standard OBD2 port that you see inside the vehicle as normal. Okay, so there's nothing fancy there. We haven't added an extra connector. You're going to plug in your diagnostic machine exactly as you would when it was an IS200. Next up is going to be fuel pump relay. So the fuel pump on this car is now being controlled via the ECU, which is the same as the IS200. So I'm actually able to activate the fuel pump from my diagnostic machine here. Now, in the description below, I'm going to have a ton of links of videos that I've done describing certain things. One of those is the fuel system and how it works, okay? The fuel system now is going to work exactly the same as it did in the IS200. They do not prime the fuel pump with the key on. You guys just haven't noticed. The amount of people that go, oh, I've turned the key on, but the prime's not pumping. Well, what you haven't noticed is that's never happened the entire time you've owned the car. So in there, I've got a really good description of how the fuel systems work, and I even go across the IS200 and show you how that works, which now we've mimicked on here, so it's working exactly the same way, okay? Next up, we're going to test the AC clutch and the AC request. And what I mean by that is I'm going to use my diagnostic machine to tell it to activate the AC magnetic clutch relay. We're going to listen to that click as I do that. And then what I'm going to do in terms of the request, what I mean is that basically the AC signal, when you press the AC button inside the car, sends data via MPX to the ECU to tell it that you have requested AC. I can then see that information on here. This will then tell me, okay, that the request has been received by the ECU. So that's what I'm looking for. You'll see AC signal will go from off to on when I press the button. And when I press the button again, it'll go from on to off. Okay, that's all we're looking for there. So remember, the AC system will work, but you do have to have it plumbed in correctly, and you do have to have all the pressures correct, and you need to make sure that you retain the 4-wire pressure switch that's on there, because that not only controls the pressure switch for the ECU side of things, but it also controls the fans turning on when you press the AC button. Okay, so that all needs to be plumbed in and connected correctly for everything to work. Okay, that's all the tests with the ignition on. Then we're going to go and move on to the engine running. So when I say start a circuit, basically what I mean is I'm going to have the key here, and I'm going to turn the key to the start position, and the engine is going to start, okay? That tells me that all the wiring I've done from the engine harness in terms of the interface in the vehicle is correct, and when you plug it in your car, it's going to turn over at the crank of the key. Really nice and simple. Then what we're going to do is we're going to check the ACIS valve, okay? So the actual vacuum solenoid valve is underneath the inlet, and that is then what this plugs into over here. But what I'm looking for is I'm looking for this to do that. Okay, now again, down in the description, I have a video on this ACIS system. I went really in depth. I pulled a whole intake apart into 2 halves. I showed you everything. I showed you the valves, what they look like, how they work, what way the air flows as part of it. So basically what it's doing is it's a variable intake length, okay? There's valves inside there that open up, allow air to have a shorter path to the cylinder, and that is obviously beneficial for high-end horsepower, but they close at low RPM and low load, and therefore making the air travel a lot further, which helps with torque, okay? Now then, when you do have the intake manifold off to put your other harness underneath, this is the perfect time to test your vacuum solenoid valve, which is underneath the intake, okay? Now then, if you take a look over here at this plug, you'll see there's a thicker white one, and then a blue with a white stripe, okay? The white one is 12 volts, the blue with the white stripe, that's ground. So in this case, if your one looks exactly like this, that means black is 12 volts, white is ground, okay? All you got to do, get a car battery on the floor, or take this to a bench where you have a car battery on, provide 12 volts to the black, ground to the white, and you should hear that vacuum solenoid valve click. If you don't hear that click, that's the time to replace it, because you don't want to end up putting everything together, start up the car, this doesn't do this, and then you got to take the whole intake off again in order to repair that vacuum or replace that vacuum solenoid valve. So, good advice, do it while you have the intake manifold off, check it, make sure it works 100% before you put everything back together. Right, next up is going to be the drive-by-wire test. Okay, so as I already explained, this is a drive-by-wire system. So as you can hear, when I'm moving that, you can hear the throttle blade isn't moving at all. Now when I get to the end, and that's what I was talking about, that limp mode thing. So in other words, this whole section over here is actually not touching the throttle blade at all. And for a limp home mode, you had this little tiny section over here, okay? And that's only opening the throttle a tiny percentage, really not a lot. And it's kind of like a limp home mode. So if the throttle was to shut down, that you can still put your foot basically almost flat to the floor, and then the throttle would open a little bit so you could drive home. Okay, so all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move it like this, and if it revs, I know everything is working 100%. Next up is going to be the oil control valve VVT-i test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my machine to test both oil control valves, so bank 1 first, then bank 2. What it's going to do is it's going to advance and retard the cams. It's going to make it sound super lumpy. So what I'm looking for is when I press the button to do the test, that lumpy sound appears, and then obviously when I press the test off, it goes back to idling smooth again. That's what I'm looking for there. That tells me that all the connections to the oil control valve are correct and that she's working exactly as she should. Little tip for you guys, in the cylinder head here, there are little filters for the VVT-i, because obviously didn't want to get any junk from the oil system inside those solenoids and get them stuck in any way or form. If your engine has had really bad oil changes for the past years before you got it, that little filter can get blocked, okay? Now, unfortunately, it's not as easy as the JZ and the 1G in terms of changing, where you can just undo that bolt, the filter pops out, you clean it out, you pop back in again. These are built into this cam cap that's right over here, so it is a bit more involved to doing that. I think I have instructions on how to do that in terms of like we actually workshop manuals, but anyway, if I do, you guys can always ask me and I'll get them out for you, okay? Next up is going to be injectors and coils. Now, all I'm going to be doing here literally is I'm going to be pulling each injector out one by one. What I'm trying to determine is that each cylinder is firing exactly as it should. Okay, so as soon as I pull out the plug, you're going to hear it misfire. I'm going to put the injector plug back in again, and then it's going to stop misfiring. That tells me that the spark is happening and the injector is injecting, okay? Next up is going to be coming back and looking at the tacho, just to make sure the rev counter works, okay? So I'm just going to make sure the rev counter works. I'll give a bit of a rev as well, and you'll see the needle will go up and down as I rev it. Then next up, coolant temp. So the reason I check the coolant temp, this is one of the major ones that don't work as part of the MPX data that we have to translate. So I always want to make sure that my coolant temperature sensor is working. So before we actually get to the test with the engine running, I'll actually let the engine run for a bit to warm up, because the temperature doesn't really start displaying until about 40 degrees, okay? And then lastly, we've got diagnostics. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on diagnostics, how to do things and so on. Okay, so that's the last thing we're going to do on there. Right, so let's jump into the test with the ignition on. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my key, okay? Now, I've done a video on the immobilizer systems, how they work. So what you'll notice is, okay, all I'm going to do is insert the key. I'm not going to turn it, okay? The second I insert the key, you see the immobilizer light has gone off, okay? I haven't turned the key or anything like that. There is actually a wire from your ignition barrel to the ECU that we connect up that tells the ECU that a key has been inserted. It then activates the plus B circuit, which then energizes the antenna, which then reads the chip inside the key, which then turns it off, okay? We've obviously removed the immobilizer, so in this case, it's not doing that, but it still follows that same procedure. Hence the reason why the security light goes off the moment we insert the key, okay? And if you actually listen very closely, you'll actually hear that one of the relays in that box over there actually turns on when you insert the key, okay? Right, let's put the ignition on. And now you'll see we've got check engine light, we've got battery light, we've got oil light, but I did skip a little step, and that is the ambient temperature. So you'll see down there we've got 22 degrees. Okay, perfect. So that is what the temperature is inside the workshop. So that's fantastic. Okay, all right, so we've gone through those lights already. Let's jump over to the reverse switch, okay? So as I said, all I'm basically going to do is what your gearbox would do, and I'm going to join these two wires together. And you can hear that beep out of the cluster. So that tells me that the wiring all the way from this one over here to the inside of the vehicle is correct. And the reason I tested like that as well is it also tests whether the crimps are okay in the terminal as well, okay, to make sure. Right, that's the reverse. Let's move over to the speedo. So again, if you're watching our other videos, it's all going to be stuff you've seen before. But anyway, 12 volts is pin 1, ground is pin 2, signal is pin 3. It's a Hall effect style sensor. So you see at the moment, I've got power, I've got ground, so I know that those two wires are correct. What I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to put it into test mode. So it outputs a test mode signal for us. Oh, hang on. Oh, sorry. Right. Okay, so you can see there I've just got a constant flash. They're telling me this is the moment it's outputting a signal for me to test. And what I'm going to try and do now is show you this and include it in the same time there. So you can see there, right? And there you go. So as I touch it in, I get speedo working through there, if we can focus on there. Fantastic. Okay, so again, exactly the same as the other one. The reason I put all three wires in there, it tells me not only that the crimps are all okay on this side and on the body interface plugs in there, but that the signal's making it all the way into the car and everything is working 100%. Right, so that is the speedo. Let's go over to the OBD2 machine. And let's go in here. So we want to auto select. So again, remember, this is plugged in directly into the OBD2 port that's in your IS200 already. I haven't done anything fancy with this one. There's no extra plugs that are in here. All the wiring is the same. So we go from there. And you can see straight away, it picks it up as an LS400. Obviously the LS400 is August 98 onwards in this particular case. So we'll let that run through the auto detect feature now and pop up over there. So this does take a bit of a while there. So yeah, but happy with the OBD2 test already. You can see it has automatically picked up the system. Just a heads up, guys, I have come across some people where they try to use those sort of cheapy Bluetooth dongles. I don't think all of them work 100%, and I think it's to do with the communication system that these particular ECUs use. So what I would be inclined to do is to either make sure that what you are particularly trying to use, the device, does actually work in a standard LS400. I know that's not easy to do if you don't have an LS400. But yeah, if you're not getting any signal through there, you can clearly see that I am getting signal through there. So it's probably more likely an issue with your actual reader than the ECU itself, okay? Right, so now we're in the LS400. Now we can go over to the engine and ECT, or engine and electronically controlled transmission. Obviously in this case, we're running a manual, but that's absolutely fine. So what we want to do now is we want to move on to our fuel pump test, and we want to move on to our AC test over here. Okay, so let's pop into our active test over there. And when I do that, you're going to notice that there's fuel pump relay and fuel pump. Now, if you haven't watched my video about fuel pump systems in a Lexus and Toyota, that is not going to make any sense. If you have watched it, that's going to make perfect sense to you, okay? So I'm going to test the fuel pump in this particular case. And when I do this, I'm going to press the arrow to the side and you're going to hear the relay click. So I'm going to keep quiet. Let me move the camera over there. Fantastic. Okay, so again, I'm super happy. The ECU is controlling the fuel pump. Obviously, when we start the engine and she keeps running, we know the ECU is doing its job there. All right. Next up, we want to test the AC clutch. So as I said, I'm going to do an active test on here, or a test and output, and I'm going to go over to AC magnetic clutch relay, which hopefully you can see over there. Let's go into that one over there. And again, what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to test the output, and what's going to happen is it's going to activate the AC magnetic clutch relay. So I'm going to keep quiet again. I'm going to move the camera over there because the AC magnetic clutch relay is in that relay box by the ECU box. Fantastic. Okay. Right. So that's that. Let's move on to the AC request. So as I said, what I'm looking for here is the information. So when I press that button in a second over there, we're going to go over to here and it's going to say AC signal, and it's going to go from off to on. And when I press the button again, it is then going to go from on to off. So I'm going to remove all the other data on here just to make it nice and easy to see. And let's just find AC signal. There's AC signal. Right. So you can see at the moment it is saying off, which is perfectly fine, is what we wanted to see. Pop over here, I'm going to press the AC button there. And you see that signal has gone to on. Okay. I'm going to press the button again, light goes off, and it goes to off. Okay. Super happy with that. Basically what it's saying is that our MPX converter device has taken the MPX data from the IS200 and it's translated it to the 1UZ VVT-i, and that's why the 1UZ VVT-i can see that the AC signal has been turned on and off. Right, so super happy with the AC system. It should be 100% as long as everything else is plumbed in correctly. Okay, right, so that's everything to do with just the ignition on test. So as I said earlier, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let the engine run for a bit, because you might have seen it's obviously ice cold at the moment. I'm going to let it run for a bit so we have the needle for the coolant temperature slightly off the bottom there, and that way when we do the rest of the testing, and then you can actually see that the needle is going up as the engine coolant temperature rises, so we're making sure that that's working as well. So I'm going to do that, and I'll see you in a second. Right, so now we're back for the test with the engine actually running, and as I said, I let it warm up a little bit to about 50 degrees so we can see the coolant temp needle just pop slightly off of the rest position. And when we carry on at the end of the test, we'll come back and make sure that it's moved up, showing us that it's actually rising as the coolant temperature goes up. Right, so what I'm going to do first, I'm going to go through a very quick recap of what we're going to be doing, because the other videos are quite long since we went through that. I've done the in-depth explanation already, so I'm not going to do that. So first test, starter circuit. Just going to turn the key, make sure the engine turns over and fires up, no problem. Then we're going to have ACIS, so we're going to make sure that this valve does that after start. Then we're going to do drive-by-wire test. I'm just going to move the throttle and you're going to hear the engine rev up, super happy. Oil control valve test, jump on the machine, test bank 1, test bank 2, super simple. Injectors coils, remove each injector one by one, and make sure it misfires and stops misfiring when I stick it back on again. tacho. We'll come back here. I'll hold the camera here. We give the engine a bit of a rev so you can actually see it going up and down. And then at the same time, we're going to check the coolant temperature and make sure it has risen from the position where we first turned the key on. Okay. Then diagnostics. We're going to go through the diagnostics, how to do them, what little tricks you can do with the diagnostics, etc. as well. Okay. So let's jump into it. Get my ear defenders on completely. Grab our key. Super happy with that. So that's the starter circuit working just fine. You can see that's gone down. Super happy with that. Right, super happy with that. Drive by wire. Let's go to oil control valve quickly and test that stuff. Right, so we're going to do VVT-i control bank 1. Let's go over to bank 2. So next up we have got oil injectors. So let's start here at number 8. Number 6. Number 4. Okay. So let's go to number 2. Right, let's pop over to the other side now. Let's do number 7. Do number 5. Let's do number 3. Let's do number 1. Yeah. Right, so that's all the injectors done. Super happy with that. And let's look at the tacho. Pretty accurate from there. And let's get a bit of a rev. There you go. Right, and coolant temp. No, I apologize, I'll just go back at the beginning, but you can see it has gone up. And we're at about sort of 63 degrees there. So that's all gravy, so that is working 100%. Right. So what I'm going to do is... Right. Put it back on again. Okay, fantastic. So just to quickly let you know, the park neutral park switch in second, that's for the ATEMU. When the ignition's on now, you see it says on, but when the RPM is above sort of, I think 800 RPM, it goes into second gear, with how we've wired it up. So that's why you see it goes from park neutral park switch being on to second being on when I started the engine, if you guys have noticed that on there. So it's just sort of an internal test that I do to make sure the ATEMU device is giving the correct gear position as it's supposed to. Okay, right, so in terms of diagnostics, let's jump into it. Right, so you have your OBD2 machine, right? That is the best way to do it. From the start, that is the best way to do it. You can see everything. You can see engine RPM, coolant temperature, what gear position is in, how many misfires there are, etc., etc. So this is by far the best way to do it, okay? But we are lucky. This is an Australian customer in particular, but we can do the system where we basically bridge 2 wires at the OBD2 port, okay? And that then causes the check engine light to flash. Okay, so we do have that ability. So we can actually read codes even without a diagnostic machine in this particular case. And I'm going to show you how to do that now quickly. Okay, now some of you might be a little bit confused with what I'm going to do. Basically, all IS200s came with an OBD2 port, right? From 98 all the way to 2005, they all had it. Okay, but the 98 to 01 models also had a diagnostics port here at the front of the engine. Now, as you can see, it's pretty scarcely populated, so there's not really much you can do with this one, but for my purposes, it's easier. I can actually bridge those 2 terminals here, cause the check engine light to flash, and obviously just easier in my particular setup. In your guys' setup, because everything's going to be inside the vehicle, it's much easier to bridge the 2 terminals in the OBD2 port. Now, the terminals that you bridge are basically 4 and 5. They're both grounds, 4 and 5. And 13, which is TC, okay? And it's gonna make sense in a minute when we go through this one over here. So you see that what I'm bridging, because you can see my wire's already in there, and if you take a look there, it says E1, see there in the top there, and TC, this one over here. I'm bridging the same 2 terminals in here that you would be bridging in your OBD2 port over there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, as I bridge it, you're going to hear some notes change on the throttle, etc. Or not. And you see the check engine light's gone off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. I'm not going to go anymore. There shouldn't really be any more codes in the system there. Anyway, so you can count the flashes. Now, in that particular case, it flashed twice, then a pause, then 7. That's 27. Then it flashed twice and a pause 9. That's 29. 27, 29 are the secondary oxygen sensors that are not attached in this particular case. But as you can see, we're quite lucky with the Australian, European, Japanese models. It doesn't cause a check engine light, which is absolutely brilliant. And it doesn't affect performance in any shape or form. So perfectly fine to have that there. So you should have code 27 and 29, which we'll actually see in a minute when we go into the OBD2 machine over there. Okay. So that is a way how to read codes if you don't have a diagnostic machine. The only problem is they're very broad. So I'll give you a prime example. Dating back to the 1UZ non-VVT-i, remember there was 2 coils, 2 distributors, 2 igniters. So when there was a problem with misfiring or a coil firing, it obviously only gave you code 14 and 15, okay? So the reason this is not very useful, or at least not as useful as the OBD2 port, is they've kept that same system. So you're either going to get a code 14 or a code 15. The problem is code 14 relates to 4 cylinders, code 15 relates to 4 cylinders, okay? So it's not going to pinpoint exactly which cylinder is misfiring. That information is achievable with a proper diagnostic scan tool machine, okay? So, like I said, if you have to use that code over there and you do get code 14 or 15, you're kind of going to have to go along and obviously still check 4 individual coil packs before you can figure out what's causing the problem. So, it's nice if you're stuck on the side of the road and you haven't really got any other choice. You can go through that, you can read the codes, you can see what's giving you an issue and try and fix it if needs be. If it's obviously more complicated, even with the codes, and obviously you get the car towed, etc., that's obviously not the thing. But yeah, there is a way to do it without a diagnostic machine. It's just not as useful as using a diagnostic machine. But I shouldn't even have to say that. Obviously, you should be fully aware that that is the case always. Okay, right. So moving on to our diagnostic machine over here, we are then going to go into DTC or diagnostic trouble codes. Okay. And these are the codes basically that you should have all the time on your particular system, right? So I said bank 1 sensor 2, bank 2 sensor 2. So that's 27, that's 29, right? Now, in this particular case, we fitted the Atomy device. It's got rid of the solenoid 1, 2, 3, and 4 codes. It feeds engine speed and NCO and SP2, etc., etc. But we don't add the resistors on these ones over here. They do not affect performance, and it's only for the 1UZ VVT-i, because as you've already seen, when the engine is running, it does not cause a check engine light and it doesn't affect performance. So we don't fit that in. But if you guys ever in the future do want to get rid of those 3 codes, yes, we can fit the resistors. I just don't fit them on if they are not necessary, because obviously we're adding bulk. You guys have to make a plate for them to fit onto. They get hot. They can't be inside the actual ECU box itself. So if we don't need them, we don't fit them. Saves you money, saves time, everything. Okay. So if you're using a diagnostic machine, these are the 5 codes you should have. Bank 1 sensor 2, bank 2 sensor 2, shift solenoid SLU, SLT, and SLN, or 1755, 1760, 1765, or P0141, P0161. Okay, right. So another thing with diagnostics as well is when you bridge that particular thing that I've bridged over there, okay, in the diagnostic port over there that causes the check engine light to flash, it also does something else as well, all right? It locks the timing at 10 degrees on the engine, okay? The reason I bring this up is it's super important. I've had situations, and believe it or not, in the past where people have just bridged that thing and just left it and carried on driving the vehicle, okay? So it's super important you don't do that, because obviously you're locking the timing at 10 degrees and you're gonna feel that in a complete lack of power when you try and drive, okay? So the reason it locks the timing is so that you can check the timing. Again, it's one of the diagnostic procedures, basically. So if you've got a timing light like mine, you can just wrap the clamp around your wires over here. If not, you can pull the coil out, get a bogey cord, spark plug cord. There's so many names depending on where you are, but you know what I mean. Like the non-VVT-i has and old vehicles had. They had a spark plug cord that ran from the distributor to there. Grab one of those, push it onto your coil, push the other end of the spark plug, put your clamp on there. No problem at all. Now then, On your crank pulley over here, or just above on the plastic frame, you can see you've got 0, 5, 10, and 15 degrees. I've obviously painted them in white, so they're really, really visible on camera. And coming to your crank pulley over here, you'll see again, I've painted that white. So if you have any impression that either the belt's slipping and you've skipped a tooth or something like that, you can check that before you pull any of the covers off. All you got to do, bridge those two terminals with a paper clip inside your car, start the engine up, grab your spot timing light, stick it on there, and check down here, okay? Just remember, due to parallax, angle yourself like that, because if you're looking at a different angle, you might see a different degree angle on the actual crank pulley itself, okay? Right, so that does that. So super important, pull that out when you are done. Don't leave that bridged, because otherwise you're gonna have absolutely no power and you're gonna wonder why and you're gonna start scratching your head, okay? So again, bridge them to check codes, but when you're finished, pull them out. Don't leave it in there, okay? Right, so I think that's pretty much it in terms of the diagnostics. What I was going to mention as well, which I don't normally mention, is if you guys get a code on here that doesn't seem to make sense, because what you got to remember, especially with universal diagnostic readers, it's going to give you a P code, and sometimes what Toyota did was they allocated a P code to something that actually had nothing to do with the code that appears on your machine. I've seen it plenty through the years. Like for instance on the IS200, you get a code saying insufficient coolant temperature for closed loop fueling, and then people think there's a problem with the coolant temperature sensor, and actually that's not the case at all, okay? I have very detailed diagnostic sheets from Toyota to help you guys diagnose when you have a code, if you give me a code. So if you guys do need that sort of stuff, please feel free to contact me. I can supply it to you, absolutely no problem at all. That is super helpful when you're diagnosing. So sometimes these codes, these actual codes that it gives you, can sometimes throw you off, okay, and give you completely wrong information. So again, guys, just something I wanted to bring up because I've seen it so many times, etc. I just thought it's very useful information for you guys to know. Don't always trust the code that you get. If you're unsure, give me a shout. I'll give you the proper Toyota-Lexus diagnostic sheet. It'll give you the code, what it comes up on a diagnostic reader, and what the actual symptoms could be that's causing that code to occur. And like I said, that is one that always springs to mind, is the one where it says coolant temperature too low to do closed loop fueling. It's nothing to do with the coolant temperature sensor. It's actually the oxygen sensors that are causing you problems in particular, in that particular case, okay? But anyway, so that's the diagnostics portion done. As you can see, she runs beautifully, absolutely no dramas at all, completely smooth. In the description down below, I've got a bunch of videos with a bunch of helpful things for you guys to go over. It'll help you diagnose problems, it'll help you get the engine installed, it'll help you do preparation, etc., okay? Now then, at the end, you're going to see a bunch of photos of what the harness looked like when we received it, and what we've done to it, and what it looks like complete. And that's the part that I said to you guys, you can go and have a look and see what that ECU box should look like when everything's plugged in correctly. So that's going to come up next. But as always, thanks for watching, guys. And as usual, if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them down below. And again, if you have a particular question about something, and next time I have a harness on the stand and I can do a video on it, I will do that for you guys. But thanks for watching. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life. I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, put your hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light. Ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took the red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to feel?